right. Hi, Denver. How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
Doing good.
I would like to put in a disclaimer.
Okay.
Anything that I say in this interview does not reflect the views of the administration or board of the Williams County Public Library, my employer, or any organization or club of which I'm a member.
Okay. So we're back. All right. So yes, I wanted to know more about the history of theater in Bryan that you have uncovered.
Well, not just theater, it's basically arts in Bryan and Williams County.
Mhm.
Um, if if you can imagine in 1820 when we became a county, this was considered the frontier. So for the first 50 years of our existence, art was the, not even in the top 10 things that need to be done. You had to establish a town, industry. So art really didn't take off until the late 19th century. And I do have to mention that we have to give credit to the women of this town because all of the art came from women's groups and from women's church groups. And if it weren't for the women of Bryan, and I don't think they get enough credit for this, there would be no cultural life here. Even our library came from a women's literary club. That was their project. They founded the Williams County Public Library in 1889 as one of their projects. Um, the Art Clan Art Guild that came about in the mid 20th century was founded almost exclusively by women. So from my perspective, and I don't think, and from my perspective is that I don't think the women of 100 and 120 years ago get enough credit for establishing what art we have here.
Mm-hmm.
And even in theater, the first performance of what became WCP, the Williams County Playhouse, and then WCCT, the Williams County Community Theater, was in a woman's living room. She and her friends decided to put on a show, and that's what established it. So
Wow.
from my perspective, and I'm writing an essay, but I would like to expand it. It's I call it culture in petticoats because that's really what happened, and it's an amazing thing when you think of it. And then of course these organizations, I've delved into the misogyny of the fact that when you say I had a wife and she joined one of these clubs, she would not be known as Mrs. Jane. She would not be known as Jane Henderson. She would be listed as Mrs. Denver Henderson. She was only known by her husband's name.
Right.
And so for me, the history of art and performance in Williams County, I have to tip it to those women who had to run households and raise children and still found time to read a novel, to paint a plate, to memorize lines. I mean, that's really something we need to recognize.
Yeah.
But to your other your initial question about performance, prior to the establishment of the community theater, there had been traveling vaudeville shows and traveling operettas. The Masonic Hall here in Bryan used to host them, and then we had a performance hall above the Masonic Temple that used to host them, and the Oddfellows Hall had shows in it. And so it was really whatever we could catch here between the big cities of Fort Wayne, Toledo, Chicago, Detroit. And it was pretty typical of the Midwest. Vaudeville shows coming from the Berkshires in New York, or Broadway breakoffs coming here. And it really wasn't until about the late 1940s, early 1950s that performance was established in Williams County, and particularly in Bryan. The Williams County Playhouse began here in Bryan. It did eventually move to Montpelier when it bought a larger facility, but it has now moved back to Bryan with the Goldsmith Theater. As I said, it started in somebody's living room. It was just a group of friends getting together to do a show, and it grew from there. The Williams County Community Theater is one of the, I think, top 5 oldest community theaters in the state of Ohio.
Wow.
We have that distinction. We are in the Ohio Community Theater Hall of Fame. So, and we've had many people from our theater also in the Hall of Fame. And performance in this town is alive and well.
That's amazing. I wonder where your curiosity to delve into all of this history came from.
When I joined WCCT, invariably after every performance, there would be someone of a certain age that would come up to me and say, "Did you know Cecil Goldsmith?" Now, it seemed that Cecil Goldsmith was Mr. Community Theater for 40 years. He died in 2003, and I moved back to Bryan in 2005. I never met him. By the way, his grandson became my best friend. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't. I knew that, but he became my best friend. We were roommates for a year. But it was this. I didn't know this Cecil Goldsmith, and who was this Cecil Goldsmith? So I started to delve into who Mr. Goldsmith was. An amazing man, by the way. Played jazz saxophone when he was young. Came to Bryan on a whim. Worked for Ohio Art, Mohawk Tool. Was in the Toastmasters. Used to go around the country speaking. Wrote a newspaper column for the Montpelier Leader Enterprise for about 5 years. Wrote an updated version of Much Ado About Nothing, or As You Like It, As You Like It. He was a fascinating character. And I guess because I'm short and I'm skinny and I got this hyperactive energy, I'm Cecil Goldsmith. And the strange thing was Cecil wrote an original play called 65 Roses because he lost 4 sons to cystic fibrosis. And I was cast in that, in the role that he created for himself, based on himself.
Wow.
So I played Cecil Goldsmith. And after the performance, cannot tell you the number of people that came up and went, "You are Cecil. You were Cecil. You nailed it. You were him. I don't know how you did it." So I can't say I'm a reincarnation because he was still alive, but
Right.
that's how I started. What started was I wanted to see what Mr. Goldsmith was like. And that led me to learn about the fact that in the early days, it was in a living room. The building that my department is in was a bank building, and it had a 3rd floor. They took the 3rd floor off in the early 1960s. There's a story of they would rehearse shows there in that wide space, and then go to Lincoln School auditorium to perform it. And one show required a cast iron stove as a prop. They carried it up the stairs, 3 flights of stairs, and then carried it down 3 flights of stairs and a block to the school. By the way, my duplex is next to where the school used to be. So I walk that route to work every day, and I don't think I could do it carrying a cast iron stove.
No, probably not. Seems like there's a lot that feels like inexorable or like a fate that kind of brought you on this path, which I find really interesting.
Yeah. And as I said, when I moved back here, I lived here for a short time in the late 1990s and worked at the library then as well. But that was a very strange time in my life, which I won't get into. Maybe a face-to-face private conversation. But when I came back, I said, "What the hell have I done?" There was nothing that I was used to here. I came from a university town to Bryan, which was complete culture shock. I mean, complete culture shock. Yeah. I mean, they told me they had a coffee shop, and I walked in, and it was like, no.
Well, there's technically coffee there.
Yeah, there was coffee there. It was Maxwell House, I bet, but it was coffee, and there were donuts, and that was Lester's Diner, by the way. Luckily, they open seasons, and it's a wonderful place, and Cora is now open. And then I found out about the Williams County Community Theater, and they were doing a show called Proof, and I had read it and saw a version of it and wanted to be in it, and auditioned and got the role, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Had you done theater prior to going out for Proof? Okay.
Oh, yes. Actually, this year marks my 40th year as an actor in community theater. I started when I was 10.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's quite an accomplishment.
My 40th year, and most theaters were closed. Yeah. So, yeah. Actor, director, I've produced as well. So
That's
it was always a part of my life. It was always an interest. I mean, it's a passion.
yeah.
People say things like, wow, what are you doing here? Why aren't you on Broadway? And it always kind of ticks me off because I want to say, well, don't you deserve good entertainment too? And besides, it's not as simple as me buying a plane ticket to New York and there I am on Broadway. You know?
Right. Correct.
At the age of 51, any future I have on Broadway is dead.
I wonder though, so you wound up staying in Bryan. It doesn't sound like you have any plans to leave or go seek a larger venue or market.
I have to confess that probably about the first 5 years I lived here, I kept saying, I can't wait to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And, but then I made friends. And then I started to learn things. And I realized that from a completely egotistical point of view, it's nice to go to Walmart and have 5 people recognize you. It's wonderful being a relatively medium-sized fish in a very small pond.
Yeah.
And then I started, like I said, I started meeting people. I started doing things in the community, and started mentoring theater kids. I'm lucky. I don't have any biological children, but I have dozens of people I consider my kids.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe a dozen or so. And that made me stay. And there's a certain spirit to this place that I'll probably stay here till I retire.
That's really amazing. There is definitely a pull and a draw to this, to Bryan, that I still haven't quite deciphered yet. I spent such a little time there and I can't wait to come back and explore it more. I wonder, what do you think is the next step for Bryan moving forward? We're going to be coming out of this pandemic soon. People are leaving cities and they're moving to more rural areas. Do you think that portends well for Bryan? Do you think it's going to change the makeup of the town? Big questions.
No, but important ones, and ones that need to be at least thought about. I'm neither an optimist or a pessimist. I try to balance the both. You can't, if you're completely pessimistic, you have no joy, and you're miserable. And if you're completely optimistic, the world kicks you in the teeth several times very hard.
Yes.
The optimistic part of it would be that as we come out of the pandemic, we realize a deeper sense of community, and some of the fracturing that happens in small communities. We realize that we did pull together and that we did maintain. The pessimistic side of me would say that there is still a very entrenched idea that, Betsy said it best, we're 20 years behind. We still think that a large manufacturing base will save this town. And people are loath to think outside of the box, to use a trite phrase, but I can't think of another one, of how you can grow the economy here. And it does come down to economy. It comes down to jobs. And how do you stanch the talent drain in this town? If you've got a kid that's a junior in high school, I can guarantee you, once they finish college, they're not going to come back home.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other social attitudes and social problems I could get into that also drive them away. But the thing is the opportunities that were here in 1970 are not here, and they never will be here again in that particular form.
Right.
You will not be able to get just a high school diploma, get hired in, and 30, 40 years later retire, having spent your entire life in one factory. And that isn't just Bryan, that's nationwide. My generation was supposed to change jobs 5 times. Your generation is supposed to change jobs practically every 2 years. And that's scary on a national level. But it's also good too, because the people who stayed in one area for 40 years only ever saw one area for 40 years. And it was an inclusive culture. Then they never experienced anything. People your age may end up in Philadelphia or Chicago or New Mexico or Idaho. You're going to get all of these threads of cultures and ideas and different perspectives. Different perspectives. That's the one thing I would love to bring to Bryan, is a different perspective in every area.
Yeah, I think it's super important. I know, and this isn't about me, but born in Bryan.
It is, but may I interject? It is about you, because you created this project, so it is about you.
Yeah, I guess so. But I want it to be about how I can relate to Bryan, because the way that I thought I was going to relate to Bryan isn't the way it wound up happening. You know,
Right.
This initial impulse that I had.
You are preaching to the choir on that one. You really are. I mean, I was at an 80-degree angle to this town from the moment I stepped in, and here I am. I can't foresee me ever moving. So yeah, I get it. Your perspective.
It's amazing what happens when you just kind of keep pursuing inquiry and see where it goes. But yeah, I grew up in Texas, and I lived in Portland, Oregon, and then I went back to South Texas. I lived in Houston, and now I'm here, and then I have this whole thing with Bryan. I'm trying to figure it out in a pandemic from hundreds of miles away. And so it's this really kind of crazy journey. And the people that I've met, like you and Betsy, and I talked to a visual artist named Scott last week. I'm going to be talking. He's awesome. And so it gets me really excited to know that, or to be able to offer a lens to people that have never been to Bryan or lived in a small town, and to show that there are these perspectives, though. So, that is in Bryan. You do have those things. It's just, how do you cultivate them and bring them to light? So, like, my next question for you, I guess, would be, what do you think? What's the next actionable step? Like, what's something that you can envision happening in the next couple of years to move forward progress in response, as having a more global perspective, kind of trying to restart the economy? Again, big questions. I'm not an interview expert.
That's all right. Let me break it down into two things.
Please.
The first is that I think as we get more involved in social media, people here are going to find out that there's a broader world outside the boundaries of Williams County. I am not anti-social media. Now, I'm old-fashioned. I still write thank you cards and all that, and I'm practically technology illiterate. But social media, and I don't think yes, it has divided us in a way, but I also know high school students who have friends in India, who talk to people in South Africa, who have one young lady, FaceTimes with relatives she knows in Peru. So social media has dissolved boundaries and borders, and I think that will help. And I think if we can get some more people to stay here who have a broader perspective, it's going to change the flavor of the town. The other, I really hope that we have these little threads of culture. We have painters, and we have potters, and we have performers. I would like to see us coalesce into a group, even if it is meeting once a month to have coffee at Cora and just game out an idea. The grandiose things in my head that I see for this town, I'm not going to live to see, even if I start putting the seeds here. And I'm okay with that. You have to realize that if you want something good for a place, it might not happen when you're around. So if I can start it now, with the help of friends and people who care, I'm prepared to see it not come to great fruition when I'm gone, or when I'm still here. But yeah, if we could collect, I mean, we have the Williams County Community Theater, and we have Fountain City Festival. And when I got to this when I got to this town, those two factions didn't talk to each other. There was this rift. Wow. They pursued the same aims. Fountain City Festival puts on one large semi-professional musical every year. WCCT does 4 shows a year, usually straight plays. And they had all come from initially from the same genesis, but they somehow split apart. And myself and some of the younger members of the theater started doing shows with both and talking and making friends. And now there's this wonderful rapport.
Mhm.
I want to build on that and bring in Black Swamp Art Guild and some of the,
Yes.
why aren't we talking to tattoo artists?
You know, that's someone I'm going to contact very soon. I want to try to
Right.
reach out to Testament Tattoo and,
Because that's another thing we need to do. We need to broaden people's definition of what art is.
yes.
It's not just a painting or a piece of sculpture or a performance. It's a poem. It's painting. I have a very good friend at work who is a woodworker who makes beautiful, creative furniture. Art, it is so elastic, but here in Bryan, it is so rigid as to what the definition of art is. And talk to young artists who are drawing maybe things that will shock people.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a photographer that I really want to reach out to that does these really amazing portraits, mostly of women in various stages of undress, but it's so powerful and beautiful. And she and I have been going back and forth about having a conversation about, she's this photographer doing these kind of daring, beautiful portraitures in a small town. And like, what's the response to that, you know?
Right. And the death knell to everything is that horrible phrase, well, we've never done that before. So if we could get people to realize that tattoo artists are indeed artists, and that sometimes, you know, you may see a penis or a vagina in a photograph, and that's okay. That's not pornography. You know.
Yeah.
What was it the Supreme Court Justice said? I know pornography when I see it.
Yeah. Can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Somebody always said it's pornography if they're leaning back and it's out of focus.
We have a lot more porn on our hands than we thought.
Oh yeah. But and we also have outside resources. We have a wonderful community concert that invites artists and traveling artists here, and the Toledo Symphony comes here every year. And no disrespect intended to the people who bring the symphony here, but the audience is always the same people.
Yeah,
we need to broaden that.
Right.
There is still that sort of early 20th century, late 19th century strata that art is for a certain class, a certain intellectual framework. Balderdash.
Yeah.
I mean, no.
Agreed. And I think that,
and that's the other conversation just outside of art that we need to have in not just in Bryan, but maybe in small towns and smaller cities. And that's class.
Yeah.
And class expectations and classism. And, you know, that's a conversation that is very difficult. Americans have always believed that we were a classless society, and that's a dangerous lie.
Yes, it is categorically untrue. And I mean, even if you look at England and look at the West End, do you know how cheap tickets are for incredible productions, because they make it accessible to their people. So it's not a matter of class. Everybody can enjoy it. And so putting art on this pedestal that only a certain kind of person with a certain income can enjoy, or a certain education level can enjoy, is
one of my greatest accomplishments living here was that I directed a production of Romeo and Juliet. I made it very contemporary. The only set piece was a bi-level piece of yellow construction scaffolding. I had the cast spray paint the set with graffiti. We did it all modern. Friar Lawrence was a strung out drug dealer.
Right.
And the number of people that just by putting it in a different perspective and doing it in some way that they had never seen before, because they obviously hadn't seen the DiCaprio movie, the number of people came up to me and said, I understood it. Yeah. My mother, my very own mother said, I knew exactly what was going on. And Shakespeare is not inaccessible. We've been told it's inaccessible. And I told my cast, we are doing a play. We are not doing Shakespeare, the cultural icon.
Right.
It's a play. It's a script.
And Shakespeare's not meant to be read. And I think if
No.
you force 10th graders to read Julius Caesar, of course they're going to hate it because they
Oh
don't
my goodness. Yes. Or Macbeth, one of the most obscure plays. I mean, when you think of the emotional, intellectual ideas behind Macbeth, it's one of the most obscure ones. Of course, a lot of blood and murder. Great. If you want to do that, if you want blood and murder, I mean, Titus Andronicus has people eating other people and tongues cut out. But yeah, Shakespeare should never be read. You should always see it performed. Always.
No. Sorry, my dog is fighting my cat, so I apologize for the background noise.
That's all right. And that comes from somebody who studied Shakespeare in college. And I realized early on, unless you're acting Shakespeare, then you can read it. And then maybe I shouldn't say you should not read Shakespeare. Yes, you can. But it doesn't have the same impact as seeing it performed. No play has the same impact reading as seeing it performed.
No. And I think it's something that we take for granted. I think as performers, I've spent 15 years as a stage actor. I love reading scripts because I have the knowledge to back up like how to stage it in my head, how to direct it, and like I can see all of those things. But if you don't have access to that experience and you're just reading dialogue on a page,
and if you're a 16-year-old kid who has never left the farm, Shakespeare is a foreign language.
Yeah.
And the moment it starts, you're going to tune out.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. And so I guess that kind of leads into how like ways to make the arts accessible and destigmatize them in a way so that people, especially in small towns that come from more working class backgrounds that kind of eschew arts as a legitimate career.
Right.
Like how do you engage people in at least engaging with it in a recreational standpoint to at least expose more people to it?
A few years ago, my friend Lonnie had a bizarre idea. She found out that the movie Evil Dead had been made into a musical. Evil Dead, the musical.
Mm-hmm.
Great musical, by the way.
I know, it's hilarious.
It's absolutely hilarious. I'll tell you what, I would tell you what my favorite song is, but it has the F word in it. So
that's my favorite song.
Yeah. And it had to be an independent production. They were definitely not going to put it in our season. I love our board, but they're still the board from Midwest. And so we did an independent production. We did it in front of a barn that's out in the middle of a park that's out in the middle of the woods. You had to drive across a rickety bridge to get there. It made $3,000. It was attended by people from all around, from people from Michigan, from Indiana. So how do you get the arts? You do the weird stuff. You do stuff that people know. I don't particularly like the show, but I can guarantee you that if we put on Les Mis again, we're going to get an audience.
Sure.
And we need to start pressuring public officials that when there's a budget crunch, the first thing you cut are the arts. That needs to cease.
Yes.
Subsidiary contracts for teachers who want to do things artistic in the arts are far lower than teachers who want to coach something.
Yeah.
And you need to do things in some way. You need to do things that pique people's interest. Mm-hmm. This is sacrilegious for a community theater. Nobody wants to see yet another performance of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown and The Odd Couple.
Yeah.
It's been done. We all know it.
Yeah.
Yes, they're beloved classics, and they bore the crap out of me.
Yeah, and if you want people under 90 to come see your stuff.
Right. And that's the other thing. My, I don't mean to sound ageist, but I'm afraid that if I make most of my audience members laugh too hard, they're going to have a heart attack because they're of a certain age.
Yeah.
And the community theater audiences are aging.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a form of entertainment that was accessible more when you didn't have so many other options.
Yeah.
And that is how do you get butts in seats? The famous phrase, butts in seats.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I love our older audience members. They will laugh.
They're the lifeblood, and they're great.
They're great. but I'm also afraid that in 10 years, we're going to walk on stage and most of our audience is gone if you don't cultivate another audience.
Exactly.
And that is going outside of what might be called repertory theater, of doing, doing the low comedies and, in January, my good friend Kevin and I were in a great two-man show called Freud's Last Session. It's a fictional, it takes place as a fictional meeting between C.S. Lewis, the great Christian apologist, and Sigmund Freud, who is dying of cancer, the great atheist. And you would not think, but we did it 2 nights and it was packed every night. And people would come up to me and say, I didn't think I was going to like this, but I loved this. Mm-hmm. You can make people think. You can go outside of what is the norm. You can go outside of Neil Simon and Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Mm-hmm. Do you think
not to say that those things are bad. I don't want to sound like a snob.
They're classics for a reason.
They're classics for a reason.
Absolutely.
But I would be happy if I could live the next 30 years of my life without ever seeing another production of Oklahoma.
Fine with that. I would be fine.
Yeah, I'd be great. I think I have the DVD somewhere. I could watch it.
But so I
have a question for you.
Okay.
My question for you is what is your dream to the end of this project? What is I don't want to say goal because that's too business oriented. What is the hope at the end of this?
I think the hope at the end of this, and it is evolving and has been evolving, and I've had different iterations of what I hope for this. Ultimately, I think the big takeaway or the big thing I want out of this is just to find maybe a way for businesses and artists to come together and as a larger community and say the arts are important to us and come up with some sort of initiative, that's a big, broad thing. My dog, I'm so sorry.
Adorable.
Beauty. Come up with an initiative that can engage people that don't consider themselves as artists in the arts, and to kind of help put Bryan on a path of being recognized and noticed for their arts. I think it's probably, and it probably won't even be in my lifetime that Bryan becomes Yellow Springs or Marfa, Texas.
Right.
But I think that's a viable path for Bryan that has not been explored. And I would really like to see more diversity and more recognition for the arts come to Bryan. And I think the way to do that is to start having these conversations and to start dreaming,
Right.
So that's a kind of big nebulous.
I will confess that's been what I've been thinking for at least the last 8 years as I got more comfortable in this community. And I met more artists. And I met more people who do art on the side that don't really think of it as art. And that's what I want. I want to bring art out of the closet in Bryan.
Yeah, exactly. That's so key. I do, and this might be cheesy and this might be cliche, but I think everybody has the capacity to be an artist. I think everybody has an artistic talent or something hidden, whether they know it or not. And I think everybody can engage with art, and I think it's therapeutic, and it's good for your soul to.
There is an art to being a good consumer of art.
Yes.
You don't make anything. There is an art to being able to look at something and see the nuance and the subtlety and maybe the overt way of doing it. There is an art to being a consumer of art, and so you don't have to carve or paint or act or to be a part of an art community. You don't have to have a big checkbook to be a part of an art community either.
You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be particularly educated in a certain subject.
Right. Sorry, I have to adjust. But and that's sort of the divide. You're either an artist or you're somebody who has money and patronizes the arts. And sometimes never the two shall meet. That's bald. And I keep saying balderdash because I can't say bullshit. It's bullshit. The spectrum of the fluidity of what an artist is, or what art is so broad and so wonderfully malleable.
Yes, it
That,
absolutely is.
yeah, my goal within the next 2 or 3 years is to contact local tattoo artists and get their sketches and display them as an art display somewhere,
That would be amazing.
and actually celebrate them as artists, as visual artists, and break the stigma of the tattoo artists of just being the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
And it's I think that's a really interesting thought, and especially since my generation and the generation ahead of me and Gen Xers, like, we started popularizing tattoos and normalizing them. I mean, like, I've got 5, and but there still is a stigma. There's still an unprofessionalism.
oh yeah,
Having visible tattoos, and even when I started getting tattoos, like, I had to find places I have to put them in places that I can cover them very easily, to be professional, or even to be on stage and stuff. But now my career's kind of going in a different direction. But to just remove that, and one of my best friends says it very well. He says, "Your body is a temple, decorate it well."
exactly.
And there's also, going back to women, women tattoo artists have it very, very tough. It's a really difficult industry for women to break into. And so I think even going further in advancing tattooing as a legitimate art form, like putting forth women tattoo artists.
And I will admit to you, and whoever you want to show this to, there is a subversive agenda underneath all this on my end, and that is that I want to break misogyny, and I want to break homophobia, and I want to break nationalism, and I want to break a lot of stuff. I want to see an Asian artist come in and explain what it's like to be an Asian artist in a predominantly white market.
Yeah.
I want to bring in a trans person to talk about trans art in a transphobic society. That will probably definitely be 10 to 15 years from now, or maybe not even in my life. So ultimately, my subversion is I want to make this town comfortable for that kind of art.
Well, and I think, one really great way to break all of those stigmas is to put it in front of people, and to put a person in front of people. And I think once it's no longer this nebulous thing or this evil that is coming at you through Fox News, and there's an actual person in front of you,
right,
with feelings and thoughts and emotions and a story, it becomes a lot harder to hate that person, or to have prejudices against that person.
And I can guarantee you that, being in Bryan, there are probably a half a dozen people that I'm the only gay person they have ever met or ever known. And I know most of them have completely changed their attitude about what a gay person is. Or
well, and then
we don't spit fire, and we don't kill babies, and we don't have horns coming out of our head, and
don't.
But the thing I've always come up against is we don't convert. I literally had somebody say, "You're pretty good, but don't make a pass at me." And that I crushed his spirit by saying, "Don't worry, you're not my type." But that goes back to being raised to think that every gay man you meet wants to get in your pants.
Right. So. And it's more of a projection about that person than it has anything to do with you and their fear.
Right.
But I think that
But we can't dismiss that fear, and we need to not confront it so violently.
No.
Meet it as a human being to human being, and say, look, that's not what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because when I was younger, I tried that. It doesn't work.
It makes people upset and dig their heels in. And then you've confirmed all of the evil things that they think about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you put yourself in being just as narrow-minded as they are, as you perceive them to be.
And it's hard. It's hard to have to be the bigger person, and in the face of that. And I commend, everything that you've gone through being an openly gay man in a small town. That Sure, it certainly has not been easy all of the time.
No, it has presented problems.
Yeah. Which I won't, we don't have to go down that road. That's, yeah.
I'm not uncomfortable with it.
It's your prerogative.
Right.
My main line of,
I'm going to use a word that's very harsh, but I can tell you that I moved here when I was in my 30s. And for the 30 years prior, I had not been called faggot as much as I had been called in the first 2 years I lived in Bryan. So, which is probably why for the first 5 years I lived here, I wanted to leave.
yeah. And do you think it was just people getting to know you that, I mean, I don't know, has that, I would imagine that it subsided, you've stayed.
Yes. It took understanding the milieu of Bryan on my behalf as to living in a small town as a gay man coming from a university town where you didn't have to worry about it. You have to be a bit more guarded.
Yeah.
And not go back so much as to change tactic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and then as I got to be known, I joined theater and I had a large group of friends. And by the way, I think some of the homophobia was just a gut reaction to what they've been taught. I've never, within my friend circle and even a broader circle, I've never had problems with that. This was mainly when I was out with other people and I was perceived to be, and so I had to adjust my tact, and as I said, 6 people. I'm the only gay person I've ever met, and I know 3 of them were 3 people who called me that. So
I'm really sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had to do so much work in order to situate yourself in this community and find a place and a home and acceptance.
Well, yes, it did. I love Bryan. I love this town. Everything I say about it that may be taken as negative is actually coming from a place of love and admiration and an absolute belief in the potential of every person here. So I don't mean to say that this is, some narrow-minded hick town. No. It isn't. It isn't. And the people who have accepted me are wonderful. I mean, they're some of the best people I've ever met. I've made friends here in the last 15 years that I will keep for the rest of my life. So it is a great place. It just has, it is the microcosm of the macrocosm of the problems in our society today.
Mm-hmm. But loving a place doesn't mean you love it unconditionally. It means
no, just you can't love anything unconditionally. That's fanaticism.
Yeah, it is. And so part of that love means wanting to see it be the best that it can be.
Right.
So
but it is hard. It will be hard for a person of your generation and who is trans, gay, lesbian, mm-hmm. queer, brown, black, yellow, whatever you want to call it, to establish here. But mm-hmm. It can be done, and it's well worth it once you do.
Yeah. And I guess the further line of inquiry is how do you set up Bryan to be prepared and to ensure a safe space for those people that makes them want to come to this place? I mean, because essentially we're asking people to pioneer, marginalized people to pioneer the rural Midwest. And that's a scary thing. And that's a hard thing.
The first step is to a more active embracing of the marginalized people that are already here. Mm-hmm. Change begins at home.
Yeah.
And we have trans kids here. We have gay kids here. Mm-hmm. And it is the story of probably most of America. And the majority of them are going to leave here.
Yeah.
because they're going to go to some place where it's not quite so weird.
Yeah.
Quote weird.
Sure.
This is not, I don't speak from ego, but meeting me, a well-adjusted librarian who isn't afraid to be who he is, has impacted some people.
And that's amazing. I mean, what you're doing just by being you and being situated in this place has influenced people and has changed the way that they think and has helped people.
Well, I had no choice. I am who I am.
Yeah.
And
but you had a choice of where you stayed. You had a choice of staying.
And that's true. And it was, and I don't mean to get back to this, but it was tough in the beginning. It really was. I really wanted to leave here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every stereotype I could lay hand to or mind to. And it was a backwater hick hayseed town. They were all, worthless rednecks. And I was the elitist East Coast liberal version of what some of them are.
Yeah.
On the right. And by the way, that tears you down internally. When you fear the people around you and you hate the place you live, that tears you down. Mm-hmm. I mean, it hurts. Mm-hmm. And then this incredible thing called theater, and I got involved in it. And I met people like Jeremy, and I met people like Lonnie, and I met people like Zach, my late best friend, and their families. And I met their friends, and I met the friends of the friends, and I met people like Betsy, and then I worked in the library, and I met the people there, and I one day I looked around and went, this is my life and I love it. So
you're gonna make me cry.
I don't believe in happiness, but I certainly do believe in contentment, and right now I'm very content.
That's good. There does seem to be kind of a pretty hefty dichotomy in Bryan. This just like artist community wanting to be more versus this entrenched, 1950s idealism.
Right. You've got the people who want to, start a literary festival, and then you have the people that mourn that the greatest loss of the last 20 years was when they closed down the country club. That's the dichotomy.
But I don't think anybody I will talk to, regardless of background, education, race, creed, whatever, political leanings, I think everybody wants the same thing.
Yes. And that's, you have hit the core of it. We all want this town to thrive.
Yeah.
We just have different ideas of how it thrives. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a group that thinks it'll thrive by looking forward. And there is a group that thinks it will thrive by either staying put or looking backward. And which one succeeds in the next 10 years determines whether or not Bryan is a town that once was or a town that is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that sounds dire, but it's true. Mm-hmm. The next decade is going to make or break this place.
Yeah.
And we cannot avoid it.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it seems like a really pivotal time for this town to make some big.
And attitudes here are slowly changing, and they are opening up. I don't want to leave this interview by anyone thinking that this is a bad place. Mm-hmm. This is not a bad place. If this was a bad place, you would be doing this interview from my apartment in Chicago. Right. Because I would go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. This is not a bad place. This is a great little town.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole reason I'm doing this. I mean, right. I saw that from the beginning. Even not having my own personal connection anymore, the instantaneous connections I made, and just being in that landscape and seeing this beautiful downtown area.
That is, I think, the greatest benefit of the Midwest is that we Midwesterners are open. we have prejudices and we have bigotries and we have preconceptions, but we are open to meeting people.
Mm-hmm.
We'll judge you.
Yeah.
Don't get us wrong. We'll judge you. But we'll meet you. We'll give you a chance.
Sure. Yeah. But this place really is, I really do think there is something special about it. And I'm just hoping that this project in some small way is
Right.
is an avenue to a vehicle for it to move forward.
I've been to very few small towns that have such a concrete sense of identity as this place does. It
Yes.
is Bryan. It
Yes.
is Bryan. And it is Spangler Candy, Dum Dum Suckers, and Ohio Arts Etch a Sketches, and the courthouse, and it is Bryan. It has a huge, nice concrete identity, which
Yeah.
is refreshing.
Well, and I think that's interesting though. I was having a conversation the other night. I delivered my thesis on this whole project the other night, and one thing
Oh, how'd it go?
that was fine. Kind of inconsequential since this seems to be a very long project. So I got to basically a progress report.
You have been out. You are. This is a lifetime project, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I kind of screwed myself.
Like I did when I joined theater.
But a kind of conclusion that I had come to when I was having conversations about this project was that Bryan did have the identity of being the place of where the Etch-a-Sketch was made at Ohio Art. It did have the identity of Spangler Candy, which is still, and these are still there. Etch-a-Sketch isn't there anymore, but what's the next identity that Bryan is going to claim? So these things that Bryan has, these are past identities and these are past heydays, right? What's the next heyday for Bryan going to look
Well,
like?
don't count Spangler out. They just bought Bit of Honey and Necco wafers. So
Whoa. Okay.
yeah. So
I stand
if you ever want to hear an interesting tale, the tale of the Spangler Candy Company is fascinating.
I did learn a little bit about them.
Yeah.
Very strange. It's started by a dentist, I believe.
Yeah, and by the way, they are a huge supporter of the arts in this community.
That's awesome.
They really are. There are some projects that would have never gotten off the ground if it wasn't for the Spangler Corporation, and at the time, the Arrow Corporation.
I'm gonna put like a subtitle here when I edit this of just like "Thank you, Spangler Candy" or "Sponsored by Spangler Candy."
This program brought to you by Dum Dum Suckers.
Yes.
Yeah, the next identity is unknown.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we are situated well enough currently to be part of the digital economy.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of missed the tech economy because we were still trying to recover from a manufacturing loss.
Yeah.
Manufacturing economy did well here because we had a rail line, and for almost 100 years, that's how you got things in and out of the town.
Mm-hmm.
We're really not, other than the turnpike, which is north of the city, we really have no major thoroughfare through us.
Yeah.
No interstate. So it would be difficult. That's why I don't think the tech economy came here.
Mm-hmm.
Our biggest employer in the county right now is a Menards distributing center near Pioneer. Well, one of the largest, and but Spangler too. I mean, it's a huge employer, and it's almost like a monarchy. In order to get in there, somebody has to die practically. And when you get a job there, you stay because it's a good place to work. And but that was the economy in this town for a long time. You had Bard and Arrow and a lot of little manufacturing around that. And now it's basically the hospital in Spangler.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, that is a template for 1,000 small towns between Philadelphia and Los Angeles. That is the template of the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it wears people down.
Mm-hmm.
It does. What the future? What's the next vision? I don't know, but it better happen fast because there's a slim hope out here.
Yeah.
A slim hope.
But I think the pandemic has presented a really interesting opportunity that wouldn't have happened otherwise, with all of the possibilities of remote working coming to fruition, and companies realizing they don't need these expensive office spaces in New York or Chicago or Philly.
No.
And people don't need to spend their money on exorbitant rent prices. They can move to smaller towns and they can still do all of the work that they need to do remotely, and be employed by larger corporations. And so I think it's a unique opportunity for small towns to kind of seize that and claim those people that are fleeing the cities.
Yeah.
How do you make Bryan an attractive option?
To get back to that, also the idea that you have to have a large corporate entity with everything contained within it. We now have realized through Zoom and through working at home that you could break off a small part of that component and put it somewhere else. It doesn't have to be attached to the larger, and it doesn't have to be, it can have its own identity. So I think if small break-off things come to Bryan, it could create it. Maybe there is a future in the digital economy. I don't know. I'm just a little actor and librarian, and I have no head for business. If I,
not my forte either.
if I did, I don't know what I would do.
It's not worth thinking about.
No, I'm completely the artistic type.
Me too. Yeah, but I do wonder, and I wonder, how Bryan can seize that and make itself available to those kinds of options. And I think it's also gonna be exactly what we were talking about before: welcoming diversity, accepting people, because people from larger cities tend to be more liberal, tend to be more open about all kinds of stuff.
And that's another maybe touchy subject is the people here think that this is the real America. This is the true American way of life. And maybe not so much in Bryan, but definitely in the outerlying county. That, this is America. This is the heartland. This is God's country. What we do here is the true American way of life. And they fear urbanity. They fear anything urban. I've always said that if the West and East Coast didn't exist, Midwest conservatives would have to make them up so they'd have something to hate. They don't even like Chicago, and that's about as Midwestern as you can possibly get.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because it's a big city. They fear urban is foreign to them. It represents everything that's evil, elitist, left-leaning,
sure,
diverse, all the bad things that, which by the way aren't that bad.
No.
I'm sorry. I kind of like it. I like a little bit of elitism, particularly if it's like my open heart surgeon.
Yes, please.
I want him to be the best.
Yes.
I want him to be the elite.
And you can be a total asshole about it. I don't care. Just save my life.
I mean, you could change your name to Jesus Christ as long as you're going to save my life. I don't care. And by the way, also religion is a very big thing here. And when I mean religion, I mean of a very Protestant Calvinist fire and brimstone thing. So.
But I mean, I think.
But that is not necessarily a weakness or a bad thing.
No.
A lot of the good, our homeless shelter is ran by a charity. We have a free clinic by a church. We have a free clinic ran by a church. Most of my friends are religious.
There's nothing wrong with religion.
No, but there is also that horrible element of fundamentalism that makes life difficult.
Yes, evangelical faith is.
So whatever this future vision is, it has to incorporate people of faith. And that has to be a part of this.
Yeah.
It has to be a part of any vision, because there are people of great intelligence, great goodwill, great ethics, who are also great people of faith. And you can't, so the people coming in here to help change it can't go, oh, you go to church, you believe in God. Ugh.
Yeah.
You can't be
Yeah.
I'm a non-believer, but I just lit a menorah.
No, I think
there's respecting the intellectual value of faith and how it comforts people and it orders their lives. When it's politicized to deny human rights, then I will become a militant non-believer.
Absolutely. But I don't think being a person of faith is at all a bad thing. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in the Bible. Not so bad. There's a lot of terrible stuff in the Bible, but
Sure, yeah.
but basic tenets, of love thy neighbor, that kind of stuff. Don't kill other people. Those are all great. Let's keep those things. It's
And
fine.
by the way, that's pretty much the entire species. Every major faith has those as tenets.
Yes.
So, trying to convince some people that Christianity doesn't corner the market on love thy neighbor.
Well,
Yeah.
Can't win them all.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Kind of a big one though.
I'd like to win a couple occasionally.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, that is a really interesting thing to think about moving forward. Because
that scares me when I talk about diversity, because it could blow up. Because the people that are here, they have an ethical structure, and they have a way of life that should not be diminished.
Oh, absolutely.
So, how do you husband that into the world?
I think there's space for all of it. I think diversity doesn't necessarily mean one.
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't mean that. What I meant is there's going to be a culture clash.
Yes.
And how do you make that less? I know that diversity doesn't mean we're going to bring in everything from New York.
Right. Yeah. No, we're not. I'm not trying to make Bryan New York. I am not trying to make Bryan New York.
And if you were, I would fight you tooth and nail, because but how so my question is how to make diversity palatable and workable in a small town like Bryan. And I don't think that has been worked out yet.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we go back to Betsy. We're 20 years behind. And yet, from my perspective, a good use of social media is making those perspectives smaller and smaller and smaller. So,
yeah, I think.
I don't believe Facebook's going to save the world, or Twitter, or whatever platform you're on, but
it does. It makes other cultures and parts of the world way more accessible than they've ever been, in very human, tangible ways, which is wonderful. And I think there's. It's not a fully formed thought, but there is something to. I mean, there's faith-based communities everywhere. There's faith-based communities in Philadelphia. Like, we're not godless heathens here.
And there are plenty of faith-based communities in Los Angeles, in New York, in Boston, in all of these supposed elitist cities.
Yeah.
That have influence and input and some amount of power, and work well with gay, lesbian, diverse, Latino, Latinx, all of these great communities. And I think it's just an ingrained thought that anything urban is bad, and an ingrained thought that anything outside of urban is bad.
Yeah.
And by the way, in the last 4 to 8 years, that divide has grown bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Wonder why.
And it's also become more and more vocal.
Yeah.
And I've always said, what I don't like about the modern world are the two extremes of ideologies are the ones we listen to, and the rest of us, like you and I and all my friends who are completely in the middle, aren't being heard.
Yeah. But the problem is these vocal minorities on these extreme sides are exploding because they feel like that they have been marginalized and left out, and it's all reactionary. Everything is just huge blow up reactions to feeling like you're not being heard or accepted,
which is the paradox, because art can confront those ideas, give you a way to access them, a way to intellectualize them, a way to bring your emotions out and deal with them. So how do you bring that into a situation where it might be marginalized as being elitist and out of the norm? Right. It's a hugely complex problem. Wow. I need a drink.
Denver and Katie solving the world's problems.
But I'm not solving them. But sometimes the solution is recognizing there is one. Yes. That's the first part of a solution.
Yeah.
Identifying the problem And I, maybe I do think too much, but these are the things I do when I'm walking around or cleaning my dishes or doing laundry. I do think about stuff like this, because we are on the crest of either a great opportunity or a downward spiral we will never get out of.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful, I wish I could invite more people to Bryan and say, look, this is a great place.
Well,
Look,
that's what I want to do. That's what I
right.
want to do. I want to invite more people to Bryan. Like, we had that brief conversation about a residency, but like, I think that is a way to do it. And there is a model for it. This is not a revolutionary, untested thing. This is
Right.
a very actionable thing.
We now have an outdoor amphitheater.
Yes.
And I've often thought maybe if we had a small drama festival.
Yeah.
Just in summer, we can sell tickets.
Yeah.
And get some diverse groups to come out and perform. Just once or twice, once a summer.
Yeah.
A small weekend-long drama festival, and just show different stuff. People think that spending public money on what they consider a private interest, though art is never a private interest. Art demands a public, otherwise it's just something you do in your own home. That spending public money on what they consider a private interest to be bad, and to change the attitude that art belongs to every human being. What was it FDR said? A great nation deserves great art.
Well, and I mean, if you look at it even just logistically and practically, art drives economy.
Oh
Look
gosh,
at
yes.
Theater. You're going to go spend money on the theater. You're going to go to dinner beforehand.
Yeah.
You're going to, use public transit, whatever. You're going to stay in town. Like, I mean, it's a snowball effect. It's not just about the importance and beauty of art. There are practical benefits to supporting the arts.
There is a reason why Los Angeles and New York City are the two economic engines of this country. And there's a reason why they are also the two cultural centers of our society. Culture drives economy.
Yeah.
What is California? California is what, the 5th largest economy in the world?
Yeah, it's insane.
Half of that is from the movie industry.
Mm-hmm.
So it has the potential.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, everybody. I would argue that everyone in Bryan benefits from art in some capacity. It's impossible to say otherwise.
When you look how it informs the human spirit, art is a birthright.
Yeah.
Everybody should be exposed to art. Everybody should make what they consider art. Everybody should consume art in their everyday lives. It is, to me, the greatest endeavor of our species. Back in the late 1930s, when the Senate was debating whether or not to fund the federal theater project, a senator stood up on the floor of the Senate and said, "The coin outlasts Caesar, the pyramid outlasts Pharaoh." That proves two things. One, they don't make U.S. senators like they used to, and two, that the creative artifact, will outlast the military gains, the economic gains. What do we know about 16th century England? We know their portraits by Holbein and the plays of Shakespeare.
Yep.
What do we know about the Angkor people in Cambodia? Angkor Wat, one of the most beautiful architectural creations on the face of the planet. The artistic artifact will outlast long after our politics and our economies and our military feats.
Yeah.
You build a society on paint and poetry.